The roar of an engine sputters to silence. A sleek black sports car, its glossy finish now streaked with dust, rolls to a stop on a remote mountain pass. Inside, a well-dressed man, rich, successful, and suddenly helpless, slams the wheel, staring at the flat tire. No service, no help, only the vast, empty road ahead. Richard McKenna is a man built by success. Mid-40s. Impeccably dressed, he exudes the kind of confidence only wealth can afford. A tech mogul, his name is known in boardrooms, his face flashed across magazine covers. His hands, though soft and pampered, are steady when it comes to making high-stakes decisions. His life is a carefully curated symphony of power lunches, private jets, and expensive watches. But beneath the polished exterior lies an emptiness Richard doesn't know how to fill. His relationships are transactional, devoid of depth. The hum of his phone is his only constant companion, his only connection to the world. His luxurious house is a fortress, each room a shrine to his achievements. His marriage, strained and distant, exists in name only. He believes his wealth is the answer to every problem, a belief that has long kept him from seeing the world, or himself, through any lens other than the one shaped by his privilege. The breakdown of his car, in the middle of nowhere, is just another inconvenience in his perfectly managed life. But the reality hits him. Money can't fix this. There's no one to call, no team of assistants to swoop in. Richard is utterly alone, surrounded by nature, a place where his wealth means nothing. The sense of helplessness is foreign and uncomfortable, and for the first time in years, he feels out of control. In stark contrast, Luke Ramirez, a 22-year-old mechanic, is rooted in a different world. Unassuming, with a wiry frame and rough hands from years of working with tools, Luke carries none of the airs Richard does. His clothes are simple, worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, boots that have seen better days. His hair, a bit unruly, and his face, though youthful, shows the kind of maturity that comes from struggle and perseverance. Luke doesn't have much in terms of material wealth, but he has something far more valuable, a kind heart. Raised in a modest neighborhood, he learned early on the importance of helping others. His family, though poor, was rich in love, and Luke absorbed that warmth like a sponge. When he sees someone in need, there's no hesitation. He offers help without expecting anything in return. On a quiet Sunday morning, Luke is walking along the roadside, on his way to visit his grandmother, when he notices Richard's car. His instinct is to help, no questions asked. He approaches without a sense of judgment, only with genuine concern. To him, it's just another day of offering a hand. But for Richard, this encounter will be life-altering. While Richard is a man who believes that money and power are the keys to everything, Luke's strength lies in his willingness to give freely of himself, in a world that often expects something in return. Where Richard is isolated, trapped by his own success, Luke is connected to people, to purpose, to something beyond wealth. Their worlds couldn't be more different, but fate has a way of bringing them together. What happens next will challenge both of them in ways they never imagined. The sun beats down on the remote mountain road, casting long shadows as Richard McKenna paces beside his car, a growing sense of frustration tightening his chest. His luxurious sports car, once a symbol of his success, now seems like nothing more than an expensive, immovable object. The flat tire is a trivial problem by most standards, one that should be easily solved by a roadside service or a quick call to an assistant. But in this isolated corner of the world, where the only sound is the wind whispering through the trees and the hum of the earth beneath his feet, Richard is utterly powerless. His phone, a sleek model worth more than most people's monthly rent, shows no signal. He slams the door shut with a hiss of frustration, his perfectly tailored suit now crumpled from the sweat of anxiety. He checks the time. His meeting is in 2 hours. He was supposed to be presenting a multi-million-dollar deal that could further solidify his position in the business world. The thought of being late, of missing the deal, gnaws at him. This inconvenience feels like the kind of problem he simply shouldn't have to face. He looks around. There's no one. No cars on the road for miles. Nothing but endless stretches of gravel, trees, and rocky hills. The notion that he is stranded, alone, and at the mercy of something as trivial as a flat tire seems almost absurd in his high-powered life. But here he is, standing on the edge of nowhere, a man with everything but no way to move forward. Then, from the distance, a figure appears. It's Luke Ramirez, casually strolling down the road, a grease-stained baseball cap on his head and a tool belt hanging low on his hips. The moment he notices Richard, his eyes flicker with recognition, a man in need of help. Richard's first instinct is to wave him off, to figure this out himself. He doesn't need anyone's help. He's Richard McKenna, for crying out loud. But as the minutes tick by, the reality sinks in. He is powerless. His wealth cannot fix this. His usual tricks, his charm, the teams of people he commands, are all useless in this moment. What he needs is someone who can actually solve the problem. Luke approaches without hesitation, offering a warm, easy smile. "Need some help?" he asks, his tone casual, like he's offering nothing more than a favor between strangers. Richard hesitates for a moment. The pride inside him flares up, but something in Luke's easygoing nature, the simplicity of the situation, cuts through his tension. What other choice does he have? "I could use a hand," Richard admits, his voice more strained than he intended. Luke's grin widens as he moves to the back of the car, pulling out his toolkit. As he works, Richard stands nearby, still incredulous at the turn of events. A man like him, powerful, wealthy, accustomed to control, reduced to relying on a stranger for help. The irony is not lost on him. But beneath his frustration, something else stirs, something he's never really felt before, vulnerability, and it unsettles him. Luke moves with effortless precision as he kneels beside the car, the sun casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. His hands are steady, skilled from years of working with metal, rubber, and grease. As he works, Richard watches from a distance, his mind still wrestling with the surreal nature of the situation. It feels strange to be on the receiving end of help. For years, Richard has been the one offering solutions, making decisions, and commanding others to fix problems for him. The idea that a stranger, someone with nothing to gain, would offer their help so freely strikes him as almost naive. Luke isn't asking for anything in return. He's not expecting gratitude, let alone payment. He simply sees someone in need and steps in, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. Richard is aware of the irony. A man who can command a fortune with the flick of a finger, yet here he is, standing in the dirt, helpless. His mind drifts back to the countless times he's stepped over people on his climb to the top, the countless deals he's made that were built on the backs of others. He has always believed that wealth and power come from dominance, from standing apart, from being the one in control. But here, on this empty road with a flat tire and a stranger offering to help, those beliefs seem shallow, almost childish. Luke, in contrast, shows no signs of ego. He's not looking for recognition, not angling for something more. His movements are quiet, focused, as he lifts the car jack with ease, his muscles straining slightly but not from exhaustion, just from the effort of doing something he knows well. He hums to himself as he works, seemingly content in the simplicity of the task. For Luke, there's nothing extraordinary about what he's doing. This is just another day of helping out, of giving without expectation. Richard shifts uncomfortably, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. He opens his mouth as if to say something, but the words don't come. What can he say? Thank you? But that feels so small. A word so inadequate for what this moment is, what this man is offering. Need any help with that? Richard asks, trying to break the silence, offering his own form of assistance, though he knows he's not much use. Luke glances up at him with a smile. "You've already done enough by trusting me," he replies without a hint of sarcasm. "I'll get it done. Don't worry about it." Richard feels something stir within him, a mix of gratitude and something more unsettling. He watches as Luke finishes up the job with casual efficiency, his hands moving quickly, expertly. There's no showmanship, no grand gesture. Luke doesn't even seem to notice how unusual it is for a man like Richard to be so uncomfortably silent, so out of his element. As the tire is replaced and the tools are packed away, Luke stands up, brushing off his jeans. His smile is easy, almost shy. "All set," he says. "You should be good to go." Richard stands there for a moment, feeling a strange lump in his throat. He's used to receiving things, gifts, deals, favors. But this act of kindness without any expectation in return, hits him differently. It doesn't make sense to him. In his world, people help because there's something in it for them, whether it's money, influence, or status. But Luke's help has no strings attached. He doesn't even expect Richard to thank him. It's just kindness. "Thank you," Richard says at last, the words feeling more genuine than he's allowed himself to believe in a long time. He pauses, looking at Luke, something new in his gaze. "Is there anything I can do for you? Any way I can repay you?" Luke shakes his head, his expression warm but resolute. "Nah, you don't owe me anything. Just pay it forward one day." He offers a final smile, a smile that says everything Richard's long-forgotten heart needs to hear. Richard stands there for a moment, processing the simplicity of it all. No complicated negotiations, no hidden motives, just kindness. He watches Luke walk away, the man disappearing down the road, as if he's done nothing more than perform an everyday act of goodwill. But to Richard, it feels like something much bigger, something that may have just cracked open the armor he's spent years constructing around himself. The engine starts, and Richard pulls away, but the image of Luke's smile stays with him, a lingering reminder of the kind of person he's never allowed himself to be. It's a reminder that he's been living in a world of transactions, and perhaps, just perhaps, there's another way to live, one where giving and receiving come without strings attached. As Richard pulls away from the roadside, his sleek sports car humming to life beneath him, the road ahead seems endless, but it's not the stretch of asphalt or the winding curves of the mountains that occupy his thoughts. It's Luke, the young man who fixed his tire without so much as a second thought, without any expectation of reward. The drive feels different now. The engine purrs, but the world around him feels distant, like he's floating in some liminal space. He's used to controlling everything, every deal, every meeting, every moment of his life. But this small, seemingly insignificant act of kindness has shaken him to his core. Why had Luke helped him? Richard can't help but replay the scene over and over in his mind. The way Luke hadn't hesitated, the way he'd smiled as though fixing a tire in the middle of nowhere was no more extraordinary than a handshake. Luke had offered his help without a second thought, without needing anything in return. The thought lingers in Richard's mind, gnawing at him, because it goes against everything he's ever known. People do things for reasons. They expect something, a favor, a return on investment. That's how the world works. But Luke had given him something much rarer, something that didn't come with a price tag or strings attached. And that, Richard realizes with a strange discomfort, is something he doesn't know how to handle. His thoughts spiral inward. Why did he help? A person like Luke, someone with so little by the world's standards, he could have used that time to do anything. He could have been on his way to work, to meet friends, or simply enjoying his Sunday. But instead he'd stopped for a man he didn't know in the middle of nowhere, just because it was the right thing to do. Richard feels the weight of the question settle on his chest. Would I have done the same? The answer is immediate and painful. No. He would have called for roadside assistance or worse, waited for a service to come at a cost. He never would have offered help without the expectation of receiving something in return, be it gratitude, payment, or recognition. In his world, favors are given with an eye toward future repayment. And yet, Luke had asked for nothing. Richard glances in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Luke still walking down the road, a quiet figure receding into the distance. But he's gone. The moment, the exchange, feels unreal, like it's already slipping through his fingers. The only thing left is the feeling of emptiness inside him. For the first time in a long while, he wonders if all his wealth, his success, his carefully constructed life, has somehow kept him from understanding what truly matters. He turns his gaze back to the road ahead. The distance he's traveled in his car seems smaller than the distance he feels inside himself. Luke's kindness had cracked open something he didn't even know was there. A raw, aching space that no amount of money could fill. Richard tries to shake it off. It's just a tire after all. Just a flat. But deep down, he knows it's more than that. And for the first time in years, Richard McKenna feels unsettled, caught between his world of calculated success and something much deeper, something much more human, something he's been too afraid to acknowledge. As Richard drives, his mind churns with questions, the weight of Luke's actions pressing against him. It's a strange feeling, a subtle shift in his understanding of the world, of people. But before he can delve too deeply into his thoughts, something catches his eye. A small roadside diner, a humble establishment with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. It's not much, but something about it seems to call out to him. Without thinking, he pulls over. The bell above the door jingles as Richard enters. The place is quiet, the only sound the hum of a worn ceiling fan. A few patrons sit at the counter, their conversations low and easy. But it's Luke behind the counter, wearing an apron and wiping his hands on a rag, that catches Richard's attention. It's odd to see the young man here, after their brief interaction on the road. He hadn't expected to cross paths with him again, let alone in a place like this. But as Richard approaches the counter, Luke looks up and offers that same easy smile. There's no recognition of the strange turn their encounter had taken earlier, just warmth, simplicity. "Hey, you made it," Luke says casually, as though nothing unusual had occurred. "What can I get for you?" Richard hesitates for a moment, feeling like an intruder in a place so far removed from his usual world of polished offices and fine dining. He notices the worn edges of Luke's apron, the faded name tag pinned to his chest. The diner, too, speaks of a life lived without pretense. Cheap wooden tables, a mismatched collection of chairs, the smell of coffee that lingers in the air. "Just a coffee," Richard says, though his voice lacks the usual authority. He slides onto the stool across from Luke, unsure of why he's even here. Luke pours the coffee without a word, his movements fluid, practiced. As he slides the cup across the counter, Richard notices the scars on his hands, faint but visible, signs of years spent working hard, often without recognition. "You've been busy," Richard says, trying to break the silence, though it feels awkward coming from him. He's not used to being so ordinary. Luke shrugs, still smiling. "It's a job. Gotta pay the bills, you know." Richard takes a sip of the coffee, the warmth seeping into him in a way he hadn't expected. "Yeah, I know, but you're good at what you do. You fix my car without blinking an eye." Luke glances up, his eyes bright but thoughtful. "It's just a flat tire," he says, as if it's nothing. "It's not about what I do. It's about helping out when you can." Richard leans back slightly, surprised by the directness in Luke's voice. "But you didn't even know me. Most people wouldn't stop for a stranger, let alone do something like that for free." Luke pauses for a moment, his smile faltering just a fraction. He places the rag down and looks Richard in the eyes, his expression softening. "I guess not, but I've learned that a little kindness goes a long way, even when you're not looking for anything back." He shrugs again as though it's a simple truth, as though kindness were the easiest thing in the world. Richard watches him, his gaze lingering a little longer than necessary. Luke's words hit him harder than he expects. A little kindness goes a long way, even when you're not looking for anything back. It's the kind of wisdom Richard would have dismissed as naive just hours ago. But now, it feels like something deeper. Luke's life is not one of luxury or high stakes. Yet here he is, offering something that Richard can hardly comprehend. Pure, selfless kindness. Richard looks at the young man before him, his gaze steady, his expression shifting ever so slightly. "You've got a lot more figured out than I do," he mutters, almost to himself. Luke chuckles lightly, brushing off the compliment. "I don't know about that. I just try to do the right thing, that's all." The simplicity of Luke's answer settles in Richard's chest, a quiet revelation. In a world where he's been trained to see every interaction as a transaction, Luke has shown him something rare. The young man doesn't operate on a currency of favors or deals. His kindness is a gift, offered freely, and it's this gift that moves Richard in a way nothing else has in years. As Richard finishes his coffee, the weight of his life, a life that once seemed so solid, so secure, begins to feel hollow. Luke's words echo in his mind, each syllable a soft reminder of what he's lost touch with, the simple, unspoken connections that make us human. Richard stands to leave, his fingers brushing against his wallet, an automatic gesture. But as he reaches into his pocket, something stops him, a quiet voice inside, asking him to reconsider the way he's always lived. He hesitates, then pulls out a few bills. Luke catches the movement and raises an eyebrow. "You really don't have to—" But Richard interrupts, his voice more steady than before. "Consider it a tip, for the kind of wisdom you don't find in boardrooms." Luke looks at him for a moment, eyes wide, before breaking into that warm smile again. "Thanks, but I still think you've got the better deal." As Richard leaves the diner, he feels something inside him shifting, like the first stirrings of change. The road ahead might still be long, but for the first time in years, it doesn't seem as lonely. For the next few days, Richard can't shake the feeling that something inside him has changed. It's subtle, like a crack in the foundation of his life that's grown ever so slightly wider with each passing moment. His usual routine feels off. He spends hours in meetings overseeing multi-million-dollar deals, yet his mind keeps drifting back to that moment in the diner, to Luke's easy smile, his quiet humility, and the undeniable kindness he'd shown without asking for anything in return. Richard tries to push it away. He's busy. He's got an empire to manage, meetings to attend, contracts to sign. He's been this way for years, focused, driven, consumed by the next goal. But now, when he's alone in his office late at night staring at the spreadsheets and projections that have always defined his success, he can't help but feel empty. It's like there's a void he didn't even know existed. That's when it hits him. He has to do something. Something meaningful. Something that acknowledges what Luke did for him, not as a transaction, but as an act of genuine goodwill. The more he thinks about it, the more the idea grows within him. He could buy Luke a car, something new, something that would allow him to keep working without worrying about old tires and long, dusty roads. Or he could offer him money, a lump sum to help ease whatever struggles Luke might be facing. Those were the things Richard knew, solutions that could be bought and measured in cold, hard numbers. But then, just as quickly, something inside him pushes back. Luke hadn't wanted money. He hadn't wanted anything but to help. So maybe Richard's first instinct to repay him in a transactional way was all wrong. He had to go deeper. He had to give Luke something that would make a real difference, something that acknowledged the humanity between them, not the hierarchy. The tension builds inside Richard, the weight of it growing heavier by the hour. He could go on living his life, staying in his lane, continuing to build his empire, as he always has. But he knows deep down, that would be the easy path, the comfortable one, and for once he doesn't want easy. Without another thought, he grabs his keys. He knows what he has to do. Richard leaves his office and heads for his car. The decision made. It's time to find Luke, really find him, and offer him something that goes beyond money, something real, something that will change both of their lives. Richard drives through the winding streets of the small town where Luke lives. His hands grip the steering wheel with an unfamiliar tension, his pulse quickening as he approaches the address he found through a quick search. It's a modest neighborhood, far removed from the gated communities and luxury condos he's used to. The houses are simple, some a little run-down, but there's a sense of warmth in the air, the kind of warmth Richard hasn't felt in years. He parks in front of a small, unassuming house. It's nothing extravagant, just a little two-story home with a garden that looks like it's seen better days. Richard takes a deep breath. This feels different than anything he's ever done, different than all the corporate deals and high-stakes negotiations. This is personal, and the closer he gets to the door, the more the weight of what he's about to do settles on his shoulders. Before he can even knock, the door opens. Luke stands there looking as surprised to see Richard as Richard is to be here. His smile is cautious, but genuine. "Mr. McKenna, what are you doing here?" Luke asks, his tone a mix of confusion and curiosity. Richard shifts uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the contrast between his polished suit and Luke's worn jeans. But he pushes past the discomfort, the unease, and finally speaks. "I've been thinking about what you did for me, helping me with the tire, with nothing in return. And I realize that I've been living my life all wrong. I've been focused on the wrong things." Luke blinks, clearly taken aback by the admission. Richard's words hang in the air for a moment, and then Richard continues, his voice steady but with a deeper conviction. "I don't know how to repay you, but I want to try. I want to make sure that you never have to worry about the things that are holding you back. I want to help you, in a way that actually means something." With that, Richard gestures behind him. Two large moving trucks are parked along the curb, filled with boxes, supplies, and a team of workers waiting for the signal. Luke's brow furrows in confusion as Richard steps aside to reveal what's coming. "We're going to renovate this place. Make it something you and your family deserve," Richard says, his words carrying an unspoken promise. "A home that's comfortable. A space that works for you, not against you." Luke stares at him speechless. His eyes flicker between the workers, the trucks, and Richard, disbelief clouding his face. "Wait, what? No, I can't accept this. You don't have to." But Richard shakes his head, his expression serious. "Yes, I do. This isn't about money, Luke. This is about gratitude, about understanding what really matters." His gaze softens as he looks at Luke, a quiet sincerity behind his words. "You taught me something about kindness, and I want to return the favor." For a moment, there's silence between them. The hum of the trucks and the distant chatter of workers fades as Luke processes what's happening. His mouth opens and closes as if he's trying to find words that will capture the enormity of the gesture. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, he speaks in a soft voice. "You're serious? You really want to do this?" His voice cracks slightly, a mix of awe and disbelief. Richard nods, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I do. I really do." And just like that, a bond is forged between them, a bond that goes beyond gratitude or repayment. It's the kind of connection that is born not from transactions or exchanges, but from something deeper, more human. Kindness, respect, and the understanding that sometimes the smallest acts can have the biggest impact. As the workers begin to unload the trucks, Luke stands back, watching it all unfold. His eyes glisten with emotion, his hands trembling slightly as he takes it all in. It's more than just a renovation. It's a chance to begin anew, a chance to build a future that is shaped by something more than what money can buy. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Richard watches from the front yard, his hands in his pockets. He stands a few feet away from Luke, who is now surrounded by his family, a mother, a younger sister, and an older brother, each of them taking in the magnitude of what's happening. Luke's mother, a woman in her early 40s, stands at the edge of the porch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. At first, she watches in stunned silence as the workers move in, setting up scaffolding and preparing the space for the renovations. Her expression is unreadable, like she's trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't know existed. When the truck delivering new furniture arrives, her knees give way and she sinks onto the steps. Her breath catches in her throat, a sharp intake of air as she tries to comprehend what she's seeing. Luke's younger sister, barely a teenager, holds onto her arm, eyes wide in confusion and awe. "Mom, what's going on?" the girl asks, her voice tremulous. Luke's mother shakes her head, blinking rapidly as tears begin to form. I don't know, sweetie. I don't know." Richard steps forward, his gaze moving between them, but it's not until Luke's mother sees him that her expression shifts. She looks at him, really looks at him, and for the first time, her disbelief seems to break. She rises to her feet, unsteady, and makes her way over to him. The distance between them seems to stretch for an eternity, but when she reaches him, her voice cracks. Why are you doing this?" she asks, her words so full of confusion, gratitude, and wonder. Her hands tremble as she wipes away tears. "You've done so much already. We don't deserve this." Richard meets her gaze, his heart heavier than he expected. "You don't need to deserve it," he says quietly. "Sometimes we all just need a little help, and it's the right thing to do." Her lips quiver, and she looks at Luke, who is standing off to the side, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. She takes a deep breath, steadying herself before she finally speaks, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "Luke has always been a good boy. He's never asked for much, always helping others, never thinking of himself. I never thought anyone would see him like this. Like he matters." Richard's heart tightens at her words, the weight of his own transformation settling in. He's no longer the man who thought money could solve everything. He's no longer the man who judged people based on what they could offer him. He's the man who has learned that true wealth is found in kindness, and that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give is the belief in someone's potential. Luke's mother wipes her eyes again, and then, without warning, she pulls Richard into a tight hug. At first, he stiffens, unused to this kind of raw, unfiltered gratitude, but he lets go of his discomfort and wraps his arms around her in return. Her embrace is fierce, desperate, and deeply thankful, and it's the kind of moment Richard will remember for the rest of his life. Luke stands behind them, his own eyes glistening, his emotions barely contained. He watches his mother, then looks at Richard, and for the first time his walls break down. His expression shifts, vulnerable, filled with a mixture of disbelief, joy, and overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," Luke says, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed everything. You've changed our lives." Richard nods, his throat tight as he responds. "You did that. You just didn't know it yet." As the workers continue their work in the background, Luke's family begins to move around the yard, slowly digesting the reality of what's happening. They walk through their home, feeling the space with wonder, as though it's not quite theirs yet, like they're still waiting for someone to wake them from this dream. But for all of them, the truth settles in quietly, beautifully. The life they've known is changing, not because of money, but because of a moment, a single act of kindness that rippled through their world, reshaping their future in ways none of them could have imagined. Luke's sister tugs at his sleeve, her voice full of awe. "Luke, look at this. It's really happening." Luke smiles, his heart full of gratitude and something more, a sense of hope, something that was absent just days ago. The warmth of his mother's embrace lingers in his chest, and he knows this is more than just a renovation. This is a turning point, a new chapter, for all of them. Richard watches from the porch, a quiet smile on his face as he takes in the scene. His heart is full, not of pride or self-congratulation, but of a deeper understanding. He didn't just change their lives, they'd changed his too. And somewhere between the act of giving and receiving, he's found something he thought he'd lost, a sense of connection, of belonging, of the quiet power of kindness. As Richard sits alone on the steps of the house watching the final touches being made to the renovation, a soft breeze stirs the evening air. The sun has set, leaving only a faint orange glow behind the horizon. The workers have left, and Luke's family is inside, moving through the newly transformed home, their laughter carrying through the open windows. Richard leans back, his eyes scanning the street. There's something different about this place now, something that feels fuller, more alive. The change isn't just in the house, it's in the people who live here. He feels it in the warmth of the conversations he overhears, in the way Luke's mother looks at him, a quiet understanding in her gaze. This home, once filled with the weight of struggle, is now imbued with something lighter, more hopeful, and for the first time in years, Richard realizes that the emptiness he'd been feeling had nothing to do with the numbers on his balance sheet or the size of his business empire. It was the absence of real connection, the kind that doesn't come with a price tag or a contract. It's the kind of connection that is built on kindness, on mutual respect, and on the understanding that sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help someone else. He runs a hand through his hair, the weight of his own transformation settling in. The world he spent so many years inhabiting, one driven by ambition, power, and wealth, suddenly feels shallow, like a facade that's begun to crumble. But this moment right here, feels real. It feels true. The smile on Luke's face when he first stepped into his new home, the look in his mother's eyes when she finally understood the magnitude of what Richard had done. It's those small, human moments that have left the deepest mark on him. As he sits there, listening to the soft hum of life continuing around him, Richard realizes that true wealth isn't in the things you own, or the success you can claim. It's in the people you touch, the lives you change, and the quiet, lasting impact you leave behind. He's learned that now, and he knows he'll never forget it. As the evening deepens, Richard stands up, brushing the dust from his suit. He watches as Luke and his family settle into their new home, laughter spilling from the open windows. Luke's sister runs through the newly renovated garden, her joy infectious, while their mother stands on the porch, her eyes closed as if savoring the sound of her family's happiness. It's a sound Richard will carry with him forever. Luke comes out and joins him, a shy smile on his face. "Thank you," he says quietly, his voice full of gratitude. "You really changed everything for us." Richard nods, the weight of the moment settling deeply in his chest. "I didn't just change things for you, Luke. You changed something in me, too. You reminded me of what really matters." Luke's eyes widen, but there's no need for further explanation. The truth hangs between them, unspoken, but understood. As Richard turns to leave, Luke calls out one last time. "One day, I'm going to do something like this for someone else. I'll pay it forward." Richard smiles, his heart light. He knows, in that moment, that kindness is a legacy, one that ripples through the world in ways we may never fully understand. And maybe, just maybe, it's the only thing that truly lasts. The sun sets, and with it, a new chapter begins, for all of them.